Ladies and gents, welcome back. We are at a new stage in the inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. We saw them gathering evidence. Now we've had a final submission from all the parties, written submission from all the parties that were involved or had standing in the inquiry, the commission itself. And today, to talk about that a bit, I brought in Eva Chipiuk. Eva, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Nice to be back again.
Yes, it's so good to have you. And this is a part where I really need your help, because it was a visual thing for all the people testifying, and now it's I guess a bit more of a procedural event. And I'm so lost in the legal end of things. I'm a mechanic, so I need your help to help me understand this. And so, what does this mean that everybody's given their written submission at this point?
Okay, and of course, nobody should really understand everything that's going on, so I'm super happy to explain. I'm just going to back it up a little bit. So as we know, and you mentioned, 6 weeks we had evidence. So it was evidence gathering, and that's when parties were being examined by the commission and cross-examined by other parties. So that was the evidence gathering portion. Then there was 1 week, still it was online, but I think a little bit less attended, was policy and roundtable discussions with academics. And there were also professionals like the former CSIS director, and they were talking about key issues that had to do with the Emergencies Act. For example, the definition of national security threat. They also had a panel on misinformation and disinformation. They had a panel on police enforcement, intergovernmental affairs, so that, everything that had to do with the Emergencies Act, but kind of talking about it on a policy level. And that was quite interesting to watch.
So
and
before you continue,
Mhm.
how does that differ from what we saw? Because we heard a lot of talk about national security issues, misinformation, what these things are. How does that differ from the people giving their testimony about this?
So the people giving testimony were sworn under oath, and they were there to provide factual information based on their knowledge. That's why you have somebody under oath and somebody as a witness. So those were, like you see, in a courtroom drama, is somebody under oath and they're giving evidence about what they know. And I think we'll talk about this a bit later, but we unfortunately did hear a lot about feelings and hearsay, but it is still their evidence. And I think we talked about this on your show before, is the commissioner is meant to weigh evidence differently if it's something somebody heard as opposed to something somebody experienced.
Right, like everybody who was watching courtroom dramas their whole life were screaming objection at their computer screens when people were giving hearsay as evidence. But so now that'll be considered, and any hearsay will kind of be thrown out as not real evidence. I'm assuming.
Well, I would hope so. The thing is, there was so much evidence, and as time went on with the commission, I was having a tougher time really believing whether or not it was completely objective and fair. The first while, it seemed to be going pretty objectively and pretty fair, but then as the federal government witnesses, and particularly the ministers, came on, it seemed to have a little bit different tone. So I'm not entirely sure how the evidence will come out, to be perfectly honest.
And
Did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say all the redactions. This is what the audience, the people watching this on the sidelines, are most concerned about. Redactions. Justin Trudeau's government ran on the political promise of transparency, a more transparent government than the previous one, the Harper government, and it's been so much more secretive than we've seen any other government in our history, our nation's history. That's a big concern to a lot of people. Where does this go from here?
Totally agree. And we had, as I think everyone knows, we put in motions to get redactions. And there was even one more decision by the commission that was recently released. And that was well after the evidentiary portion of the commission ended. And they said that no more redactions are happening. And you as a party should have been asking for these redactions well in advance. And I have a hard time with that for so many reasons. Number one reason is that this was you could ask any lawyer. This was the most intense thing that they've ever seen. Like, even people viewing got tired because it was so long. And then, let alone, we still have to prep for the next day witnesses. The second thing is, an inquiry is not meant to be adversarial. This is meant to be a truth-seeking process. It's not the party's job to ask for redactions. It is the commission's job to ensure that the proper redactions are only the proper redactions are made and any unlawful redactions are removed. That is the commission's job. Thirdly, is we just found out who the witnesses were a week, I think, before we got to Ottawa. So it's not like there was a lot of time. We didn't even have access to the database, to the documents themselves. And then, you're as a lawyer, you're on your feet thinking all the time. It's not like we had weeks and months to prepare for this. We were doing this a day to at most a week before. So for the commission to suggest that we ought to have brought a motion to get the redactions, literally, I don't know when they expected us to do that, and it shouldn't be the job of parties, like I said.
Well, and not to mention the dumps of information that were like the night before, and you had to review all this information, redactions. There were unlawful redactions on that information. And what's the procedural process? You submit in writing, and then there's time that goes by, but you have to appear the next day with that as evidence, and it was absolutely infuriating for people watching and paying attention to what was going on, again with the transparency thing. Solicitor client privilege being cited in cases where there was no solicitor,
there was no lawyer. Yes.
And then also what is it, cabinet confidence privilege, where there were no cabinet members involved. And
exactly.
I mean, we're all just doing that, having a sigh about it. Well, so what is, so here's where we're going to get into some of the stuff that has come out in your submission. And can you walk me through this? Because you gave me these papers here, and you fill me in.
So like I said, we filed a submission, and all parties were asked to file a submission. So like I was saying, there was 6 weeks of evidence, then 1 week of policy debate. And just so you have an idea of how that's different, that's kind of like a lecture. That was just academics and professionals talking. Some of them you could see listen to some of the evidence, but some, unfortunately, of the academics were still using the legacy media talking points that were developed a while ago. So that was a bit frustrating to hear people debating an issue when they're not current on the facts. So that was the final week. And then what all parties were asked to do is then, and this happens in most cases, like legal cases, is you then write a written submission. Sometimes it's oral, but you kind of take in all of the evidence and then you apply it to the law, and then you make your argument. And so that's basically what our written submission is. Looks at everything that transpired in the 7 weeks and providing our recommendations to the commission of what we think it should be recommending to the government.
Right. And we have this one page here on page 37 where there's communications between who's the Bill Blair's office and the Prime Minister's office here?
Correct. And also public safety. So Mendicino's office is copied in this email as well. So what's particularly concerning with this email is you could see that this email is dated Thursday, January 27th. The email reline is convoy issues messaging. So it's about messaging for the convoy. And as we know, and I'll remind everyone, truckers didn't come and protesters didn't make it to Ottawa until Saturday, January 29th. So a full 2 days later. So it's very interesting to note the language and what this Caroline Williams is saying 2 days before anyone even entered Ottawa. And if you scroll down a little bit to the second bullet point, that's the one I really, all of those bullet points are
it's kind of hard to see. It's a bit blurry in the PDF, but it says on the second bullet point, threatening acts of violence and inciting hatred, as we have seen from a select few in recent days, is unacceptable and does not reflect the views of a majority of Canadians.
Yeah. So what's really telling is when they say, use the words recent days. What recent days? Nobody was there. So this is clearly the messaging that they've prepared pre-protest.
Yeah, people were just in their trucks. There was no anything. Like, nobody even had a face to anyone except maybe Tamara Litch and a few other people. But that was just on the GiveSend or the GoFundMe at the time. That was it.
Yeah. And so then in the next paragraph, we're saying that it's submitted that this narrative was going to apply to the protesters by the government of Canada upon the arrival of the protesters. It simply was not true. It was misinformation made up before their arrival. And then if you recall, and it is farther down in the submission here, that when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came out of his cottage on January 31st, he uses exactly these words. This is the message. This is the narrative that they've already created. It didn't matter what happened that weekend. These words were already predetermined. This label was already predetermined.
Unbelievable. I mean, we all saw it happen with our own eyes, but to see it again in writing and have it as a submission to the government of what's going on, it just brings back a lot of horrible memories, to be honest. Now, the political game here, this is what it seems to be, because I don't take it as a game. I find the banter, the back and forth of politics to be just it's a disgusting game, and I don't like to be involved in it. I'm really more concerned about what's happening in Canada, and that goes for both sides of the debate. I hope everyone has a great life. I hope everyone has all the freedom that we knew and loved and cherished growing up. But I really want to share this one with you, and this is a political cartoon that came out recently, and this kind of really spells this out for me, that this is about some political points game and not about what's important for Canada. This is obviously someone of a liberal leaning make this cartoon, but it's been published and it's been shared around online a lot. But I wrote about this, saying the most insane thing about tribal politics on display here, it's about who wins and who loses rather than if the law is being upheld in Canada. This doesn't show a win for one side. It shows a loss for everyone. This is shameful. This whole idea that the Prime Minister can use magic, it seems, to and the artist of this clearly showing that it's some magical thing that he's doing to get away with using the Emergencies Act inquiry, and then trying to make a mockery of his political opponent here.
Well, one thing I would like to say about that is I think it's shameful that members of parliament and elected officials don't have the courage to stand up for their own citizens, because that is what they are represented to do. And if citizens of Canada are expressing dissatisfaction, they ought to hold up their head and stand up for their citizens. Because somebody calls them out doesn't mean you hang your head down. I think it's totally shameful, and I don't appreciate that in politics right now. If you're going to take a stand, take a stand, and don't play the party game. But unfortunately, like you said, I think that's the saddest part with politics right now. And if you go back to the picture and you use the word magic, I've said this so many times about Ottawa and the inquiry. It was fiction over facts. It was feelings over reality. And looking at the Prime Minister's ski marks there, that's not reality. No. And I actually think that shows a lot of what's going on in Ottawa. They live in a bubble. What happens in Ottawa is not reality. That's not how the world works. No. They live in a little la-la land that is not real. And that's exactly, to me, what that shows. I don't even know if they realized that they were doing that, or maybe that was part of it, that we don't live in reality. We have different rules, and we're going to just live the way we want to live here in our little bubble.
Well, I hope we can get to a point where even political rivals can agree on basic fundamental things like freedom in our country is an essential thing that we should all celebrate and we should all strive for more of. And I think this is what the initial reason for the convoy, whether you don't like some of the characters who are involved, that was the whole purpose of it. And that's what we're all fighting for. So I want to thank you so much, Eva, for joining me today and filling us in on what's happening and what's going forward from here.
My pleasure.
Right.
Nice to see you again.
Cheers. Thank you. And thank you guys for tuning in, trying to give you as much of a broad perspective of what's happening with this and with other Canadian news stories, of course. But I hit hard on the inquiry. So I wanted to make sure that I bring you guys all the information possible that I could get my hands on. Anyway, we'll see you guys in the next one. Keep on trucking.